The following content is a narrated fictional account.
When a tech founder trades code for cacti and escapes to a quiet life off the grid, he thinks he's left chaos behind. But peace is short-lived when a power-hungry HOA president sets her sights on his land. What follows is a suburban war no one saw coming. When I sold my tech startup 2 years ago, I didn't do what most people in my shoes would. I didn't buy a yacht, a penthouse in San Francisco, or a Tesla with butterfly doors. What I did was drive halfway across Colorado, sign the deed on a quiet parcel of land just outside the city limits, and build a life with soil under my nails and silence in my ears. After years of code, chaos, and corporate nonsense, I wanted one thing: peace. The property was a dream. A weathered but charming house sat at the center of nearly 2 acres, tucked right at the edge of a suburban neighborhood governed by a homeowners association. That detail was critical. My land was legally and geographically outside of the HOA's jurisdiction. I verified it 5 times. It had its own parcel number, a clear boundary on every map I could find, and most importantly, the purchase contract explicitly stated no HOA affiliation. For once, I was free, and I loved it. I spent my mornings sipping herbal tea in a robe that had seen better days, barefoot in the grass, sketching greenhouse designs on napkins. I was building something real, working on my first greenhouse to grow rare orchids and desert succulents. I even started naming them, much to the horror of my more corporate friends. They called it a midlife crisis. I called it healing. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, I heard a knock on the front door. It wasn't FedEx or the solar rep who usually got lost looking for the next cul-de-sac. It was a woman in pastel slacks and a blazer that screamed, "I'm important in places where nothing happens." She introduced herself with a dazzling smile and a clipboard. Karen Barton, president of the Meadowvale Homeowners Association, just stopping by to welcome you to the neighborhood. I already knew where this was going. She handed me a glossy HOA pamphlet, as if I had somehow missed the unspoken memo. I smiled, thanked her, and explained, politely but firmly, that I wasn't a member of Meadowvale HOA. My land was entirely outside its bounds. Her smile twitched for a moment, but she recovered with the grace of a woman who wasn't used to being corrected. "Oh, I understand, of course," she said, with a saccharine tone. "But everyone contributes around here. It's how we keep things so harmonious. Just something to consider." And with that, she vanished down my gravel path in her spotless white SUV. It was an odd little encounter, but I shrugged it off. Just a neighbor trying to extend her control a bit too far. Nothing to worry about, right? Right? About 3 weeks after the pastel tornado named Karen paid her friendly visit, I found an envelope tucked into my mailbox. No return address, just a neatly typed label. Resident Important Community Update. I opened it casually, expecting maybe a flyer for a block party or a church fundraiser. What I got instead nearly made me choke on my coffee. Inside was a formal-looking invoice with the Meadowvale HOA letterhead at the top, and a total due of $12,084.77 at the bottom. I blinked. Then I blinked again. A note was attached. "Dear homeowner, due to the architectural enhancements made to your property, notably the greenhouse structure and landscaping upgrades, your property has been reclassified as a Category A estate. This new tier includes premium HOA participation rates. Please remit the enclosed amount within 30 days. I sat down, rereading it 3 times. It was so absurd, it felt like a prank. But there it was, signed by Karen Barton, president, in the kind of signature that tried to look elegant, but screamed control issues. I immediately called the number at the bottom of the page. After a few rings, the familiar voice picked up. "Meadowvale HOA. This is Karen." I didn't even say hello. "Karen, I think there's been a mistake. I just received something that says I owe the HOA over $12,000. My property isn't even part of Meadowvale." There was a pause. I imagined her adjusting her pearls. "Mr. Caulfield," she said sweetly, "we recently updated our jurisdictional boundaries. After reviewing property values and community cohesion priorities, your lot now falls under the extended HOA map. It was a board decision." What? "You just decided my property is now part of your HOA?" "Yes," she replied with the confident tone of a medieval monarch. "You're adjacent. Your property value has a direct impact on the community and your greenhouse. Well, it's quite prominent. We believe inclusion benefits everyone. My pulse was in my ears. Karen, that's not how property law works. You can't redistrict private land because it feels adjacent. My deed says no HOA. My survey says no HOA. My title insurance says no HOA. Karen sighed like I was being unreasonable. We're simply updating the neighborhood. Times change, Justin. You have a beautiful home. Prestigious. You should want to be part of Meadowvale. I nearly laughed. So I should pay you $12,000 because my house looks too nice? Consider it an investment in shared values, she chirped. Besides, the board has already approved the reclassification. It's effective immediately. I hung up before I said something unprintable, but the madness didn't stop there. The next day, a printed copy of the HOA revised map was taped to my gate, highlighted in pink marker. My lot had been literally drawn in with what looked like a ballpoint pen and ruler. The words, "New boundary HOA approved," were scrawled beneath it like a child's art project. 2 days after that, another envelope arrived, labeled second notice, and this one threatened late fees. At this point, I realized I wasn't just dealing with a pushy neighbor. This was a full-on administrative ambush. The HOA was trying to absorb my property like some kind of suburban amoeba. If they couldn't convince me, they'd try to bully me into compliance. What scared me most wasn't the dollar amount. I could fight that. It was the tone, the implication that I no longer had control over my own land. Karen and her HOA weren't knocking anymore. They were clawing their way through the legal cracks, trying to turn my home into their next conquest. Well, they'd picked the wrong gardener to mess with. I'd barely had time to process the absurdity of being forcefully adopted by a suburban HOA when the next blow landed, this time not in my mailbox, but straight from the city's Development and Compliance Department. It came as a certified letter, the kind that requires a signature and an emotional support beverage to open. I cracked the envelope open at the kitchen table, a mug of hibiscus tea in one hand and a growing sense of dread in the other. Inside was a notice of violation regarding my newly constructed greenhouse, my pride and joy. The letter cited multiple complaints filed by community representatives claiming my greenhouse was in violation of municipal code, zoning ordinances, and, this was rich, aesthetic compatibility with surrounding properties. Aesthetic compatibility? It was a modern glass-paneled greenhouse nestled behind native landscaping and hand-built stonework. It wasn't some reflective alien dome. But wait, it got better. The complaints listed included excessive sunlight reflection that poses a hazard to neighboring drivers, potential to generate heat waves capable of affecting adjacent gardens, disruption of architectural harmony in the Meadowvale community. They made it sound like I was building a nuclear reactor, not raising orchids and cactus hybrids. The letter informed me that an inspection was scheduled and that I'd need to appear at a hearing to defend the legitimacy of my structure. I knew exactly who was behind this. The only person who had shown any interest in the greenhouse, aside from myself and a couple hummingbirds, was Karen Barton. And now she was escalating her HOA nonsense into city-level bureaucracy. Weaponizing red tape. I spent the next day gathering every permit, every zoning detail, every scrap of documentation I had. Thankfully, I had followed the law to the letter. Setbacks, building materials, height restrictions, everything was compliant. I had even emailed the planning office during construction to double-check glass reflectivity codes. I wasn't just legal, I was boringly legal. But legal didn't stop Karen. While I prepared my case, things took a turn in the court of public opinion, or more accurately, the HOA's Facebook group. Karen took to the local online group with the subtlety of a flamethrower. Neighbors, please be advised that a property adjacent to our community is actively in violation of HOA standards and has refused to cooperate. Legal action is likely forthcoming. Our property values matter. Then someone commented, asking who she was referring to, and she posted a photo of my greenhouse with a snide caption, "Some people grow weeds, others grow problems." She had people convinced that I was some rogue homeowner, flaunting the rules, threatening the safety and serenity of Meadowvale with unregulated plant science. The only thing I was engineering was a damn aloe hybrid named Squinty. But public perception was shifting. A few people in the group started agreeing with her, saying they'd noticed a glare or that they felt the temperature rising near the fence line. One even suggested my greenhouse might interfere with Wi-Fi signals. And while I was trying to clear my name, an HOA compliance volunteer walked onto my property, snapped pictures of my greenhouse from less than 6 feet away and posted them online with the caption, "When you don't follow the rules, you shine a little too bright." That's when I realized this wasn't just pettiness anymore. This was an organized campaign, an HOA-driven smear operation designed to isolate, discredit, and eventually absorb me. I wasn't just the outsider. I was being painted as the enemy of suburban harmony. They wanted me boxed in, fined, silenced. But I've never been great at taking orders, and I sure as hell wasn't going to let a woman who thought a greenhouse was a heat weapon tell me how to live. I was done defending myself. It was time to go on the offensive. By this point, I was living in a state of permanent alert. Every morning started with a cup of coffee and a cautious glance out the window, like I was expecting HOA troops to rappel down from a drone. Karen had weaponized the city, turned the local Facebook page into a propaganda machine, and now I felt the tension in the air the same way my cacti feel a storm coming. It was a Friday when it happened. I remember because I had just finished repotting a rare succulent I'd grown from seed, a Crassula Buddha's temple. I named him Gary. Gary and I had plans that day. Calm, quiet plans. But calm is incompatible with HOA invasions. I heard it first, the low, unmistakable rumble of a leaf blower. I hadn't hired any landscapers. I wasn't expecting any deliveries. I walked around the side of the house and stopped dead in my tracks. There were 3 men in high-visibility vests on my lawn. They had a trailer parked half on the gravel drive, half on the grass, and one of them was unloading a stack of hedge trimmers. Another was trimming the edge of my wildflower patch, wildflowers I had intentionally planted. "Hey!" I called out, storming forward. "What the hell are you doing on my property?" One of the guys looked up and, to his credit, seemed just as surprised to see me as I was to see him. "We were sent by the Meadowvale HOA. Said you were overdue for compliance maintenance." "You're on private land," I growled. "I'm not a part of your HOA. You're trespassing." The crew chief, a stocky guy with a clipboard, frowned. "Look, man, we're just doing what we were paid for. It's all scheduled. Says here, bring landscape into visual alignment with community standards." And then I heard her. Of course she was here. Karen's voice floated over the fence like mildew in summer. "Oh good, you're already getting started," she called, strolling into view, wearing a visor and one of those matching exercise sets that screamed executive aggression. She was carrying a canvas tote that read, "Leaders don't wait." She waved at me like this was a bake sale. "Karen," I said through clenched teeth, "you sent people onto my property?" "It's not just your property, Justin," she said, as if explaining gravity to a toddler. "It's adjacent, and what happens here affects the entire neighborhood. You've declined every chance to integrate, so we took initiative. The HOA voted. It's for the good of the community. You broke into my yard." "No one broke anything," she said indignantly. "The gate was open." "The gate is always open. It's called being a decent human in the countryside." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Don't overreact. We're just pruning a little. That jungle of yours is making our street look neglected, and honestly, your greenhouse roof is quite the eyesore. We're thinking a mat covering might help." "I will call the police," I snapped. "You can call whomever you like," she said, pulling out a folder from her bag. "We have documentation. Your inclusion is in process. By the time the city updates the maps, you'll be fully within Meadowvale parameters. This is all perfectly reasonable." I snatched the folder. Inside were blurry printouts of zoning lines someone had literally drawn over in pen. I mean with arrows and labels like "Justin's house equals HOA soon." She actually grinned. "Creative, right? We're updating for the modern landscape." That's when I lost it. I told the landscapers to pack up and leave immediately. One of them apologized and bolted. The others followed suit when I mentioned the word trespassing with just the right level of fury. Then I turned to Karen. "This is your final warning. You step onto my land again or send anyone else onto it, I will have you charged. And I'm not bluffing." Karen's face tightened, her smile cracking for the first time. "You know," she said icily, Most people would be honored to be included in Meadowvale. We don't usually have to force community spirit. I stepped forward, close enough that she actually backed up half a step. That's because most people don't have the spine to say no. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then stormed off toward her SUV, still parked halfway across my ditch. It took her 3 attempts to reverse without taking out one of my solar path lights. As the dust settled and silence returned, I looked at my lawn. My wildflowers had been shredded. One of the guys had tried to edge my gravel pathway and had actually vacuumed up half of the decorative moss I'd cultivated. Gary, thankfully, was unharmed, but I wasn't angry anymore. I was laser-focused. If Karen thought this was going to be a slow erosion of my rights, she was about to discover what it felt like to push a man who has nothing left to lose, except his orchids. After the illegal landscaping stunt, I stopped reacting emotionally. No more yelling, no more phone calls. I went into what I like to call tech founder mode, the mindset you adopt when you've burned through investor money, hit regulatory snags, and are one wrong move away from collapse. Calm, calculated, and ice-blooded. If Karen wanted a war, she just triggered launch sequence. My first call was to Diane Brooks, a real estate attorney I found through a recommendation from a guy in my local garden club who once beat a zoning board into submission over a koi pond. Diane had this no-nonsense energy, the kind that makes opposing counsel nervously clear their throat during depositions. She also had a deep, burning hatred for overreaching HOAs. Perfect match. I gave her the rundown, everything. The forced boundary update, the $12,000 invoice, the fake map with marker lines, the public smear campaign, and now the uninvited yard crew. I could hear her clicking away in the background as I talked. At one point, she muttered, "Oh, hell no." And I knew I'd found my champion. We met the next day at my kitchen table. She arrived in a blazer, a briefcase, and steel-toed hiking boots. I respected that energy. First off, she said, laying out a stack of papers, "Your parcel is completely independent. Here's your deed, your plat map, your zoning history, and a beautiful little clause from your title that says in big bold font, 'Not subject to any HOA governance past or present.'" I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for a month. Second, she continued, "We're filing for a cease and desist against Karen Barton personally, as well as a formal complaint with the city for coordinated harassment and unauthorized entry onto private property." She showed me photos. My home security cameras had captured Karen's landscaping mercenaries rolling up, doing damage, and even snapping photos of my interior through the greenhouse glass. Violation of privacy, destruction of property, illegal entry. It gets better. Diane had found the HOA's official boundary map filed with the city in 2010. Not only did it exclude my property, it explicitly named my parcel as an exempt property due to prior ownership and zoning grandfather clauses. Karen's pen and ink version, legal toilet paper. Then came the pièce de résistance. An anonymous tip someone from inside the HOA board who couldn't stand Karen's tyranny forwarded Diane email correspondence between board members. One gem stood out. "We can't legally force him in, but if we raise enough issues through zoning and visibility complaints, he might fold. Start with the greenhouse. People hate that thing." Oh, I see. So it was never about rules or harmony. It was a strategic siege. And I was the prize castle. Diane drafted a 12-page response packet addressed to the HOA, the city's planning office, and the Department of Neighborhood Relations. It contained full documentation of my independence from the HOA, evidence of harassment and false claims, photos and footage of unauthorized access, a demand for an immediate public retraction of all statements regarding my property, and a written apology from the HOA board. But we didn't stop there. We also prepared a lawsuit, civil action against the HOA for libel, slander, trespass, attempted fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Was that last one dramatic? Maybe. But you try watching someone destroy your wildflowers and say, "That's not emotional." And finally, just for flavor, we pulled public permit records. Turns out Meadowvale HOA had 2 structures in common areas that were completely unpermitted. One of them, the community gazebo they used for monthly meetings. The other, a storage shed for holiday decorations that encroached on a public easement. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Let's see how they like playing defense. Diane raised her coffee cup. Welcome to the counteroffensive. There are moments in life when you walk into a room and know, in your bones, that the tide has turned. That day in court was mine. As I walked through the polished glass doors of the county courthouse, flanked by my attorney Diane, who looked like she could bench press a legal textbook, I wasn't nervous. I was electric. Across the aisle sat the HOA board in a neat little row like overdressed ducks. And at the far end, in a peach-colored blazer that might have once been fashionable in 2006, sat Karen Barton, hair flawless, smile forced, knees, I noticed, slightly jittery. Perfect. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, but packed. Several of my neighbors had shown up, curious and, judging by a few nods of support, hopeful. Apparently word had spread about the guy who said no to Karen. Some had heard whispers about my lawsuit. A few had likely come just to watch the queen of HOA get grilled under oath. Let them witness. The proceedings opened with Diane calmly laying out our case. No theatrics, just facts. Clear, surgical precision. She presented my deed, zoning maps, and recorded exclusions from the HOA's founding documents. The $12,000 invoice issued by an organization with no legal jurisdiction over my land. Photographs and footage of unauthorized landscapers damaging my property. Emails proving a coordinated campaign of false complaints. Screenshots of HOA board posts slandering me online. The judge's eyebrows rose further with every exhibit. He interrupted once to ask, "You're telling me they tried to redraw legal boundaries with Sharpie?" Diane nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, without city approval, and then attempted to enforce financial obligations based on that fantasy." Then came Karen's turn. Her lawyer, a polished man with too much Jill and too little backbone, stood to argue that the HOA acted in the best interest of neighborhood integrity. But his rhythm broke quickly under Diane's cross-examination. She was relentless. Then Karen took the stand. She began confidently enough, claimed she was trying to preserve community standards, that she only wanted to bring harmony and cohesion, that I was unwilling to collaborate. But when Diane handed her a printed copy of Karen's own online post accusing me of illegally hoarding invasive flora, things turned. Her smile faltered, her eyes darted. When confronted with the internal email thread she claimed not to know about, her only defense was, "We never meant for it to escalate." But it had. And the courtroom saw it. When the judge finally spoke, his words carved through the silence like stone on glass. What I see here is a homeowners association that stepped well beyond its bounds, literally and legally, into harassment, defamation, and attempted fraud. You not only tried to coerce a private citizen into financial compliance through deception, but also trespassed and caused material damage to his property. He turned toward Karen, then to the rest of the board. This is not how communities are built. This is how they are broken. The ruling, HOA's invoice, null and void. Greenhouse, 100% legal and protected. Damages awarded to me, $415,000, including punitive damages for emotional distress, legal fees, and repair costs. HOA ordered into state oversight for 1 year. Karen immediately removed from her role via emergency board vote. The room stirred, gasps, a single clap that turned into a quiet wave of applause before the bailiff barked it down. I didn't move. I didn't gloat. But inside, oh, I was on fire with satisfaction. Not petty, not vengeful, just right. Justice wasn't abstract anymore. It wore a black robe and just verbally suplexed the HOA into the next zip code. As we exited the courthouse, the sun hit me like a spotlight. Neighbors came up, some shaking my hand, others offering quiet, stunned congratulations. One older man with a weathered hat whispered, "Been waiting years for someone to shut her down." I just smiled. For the first time in months, I could breathe. Not just because I'd won, but because I'd reminded an entire neighborhood that a man on his own land is not to be messed with. Not by bylaws, not by fake maps, and definitely not by a pastel tyrant in a Volvo. It's been 6 weeks since the gavel came down and Karen's HOA empire cracked like a sun-dried bird bath. Since then, life has taken on a wonderfully surreal flavor, the kind where you wake up, look around, and think, wow, I actually live in a sitcom now. The first sign that things had truly changed, Karen moved out. That's right, packed her pastel blazers and decorative owl statues, and left in a moving van that looked like it had been crying oil. Rumor has it she's relocated to a gated community where she's not on the board, which, if true, is the greatest karmic twist since Caesar's salad got stabbed. The HOA has been reorganized, too. Diane's complaint triggered a full internal audit, which unearthed more than just my issue. Turns out Karen had unilaterally fined over a dozen residents for things like overly aggressive Halloween decor and audibly squeaky wind chimes. The new board sent apology letters. Some neighbors still pass me baked goods like I'm a war hero, but the crown jewel of my revenge sits right in front of my greenhouse. A 6-foot-wide, custom-made, professionally engraved bronze plaque. It reads, "Built without HOA permission, thriving ever since." Beneath that, in smaller print, "For Karen, do not touch." Especially the cactuses. Yes, plural. I expanded my collection. I now have over 40 species of cacti, each one lovingly labeled with a cheeky name. My personal favorites include Carinus expulsio, tall, angry, and very prickly. Vulvus bureaucratica, oddly shaped, invasive, difficult to remove. Snoopia medlium, a creeping vine I trained to grow around my no trespassing sign, and I didn't stop there. To commemorate my victory, I threw a backyard party I called the Cactus and Karma Festival. Free admission, bring your own drink. No HOA rules. We had a band, a taco truck. Someone brought a piñata shaped like a clipboard labeled Violations. At sunset, I gave a toast. Glass of lemonade in hand, standing next to my beloved greenhouse, I simply said, "To gardens without boundaries and neighbors who mind their own damn business." Everyone cheered. Even Linda from the old board laughed so hard she snorted into her sangria. Now every morning I step outside, sip my tea, and walk barefoot across my land. No fines, no threats, just plants, peace, and a deep, delicious sense of victory. It's funny how something so small, a greenhouse, could spark such a war. But maybe that's the point. When someone tries to shrink your world, you build glass walls and let the sun in. And as for Karen, let's just say that somewhere out there, there's a cactus with her name on it. Literally.